LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 25th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 13 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use, media criticism, and political analysis show for you all tonight. There's no political comedy from Real Time with Bill Maher this week. He'll be back next week, and then Saturday Night Live's going to be back, I believe, next week as well. So the only political comedy source I have is the actual news shows, although I do have this really good Trump interview montage from Trump's interview on Justice Jeanine Pirro last night. That's a montage put together by AM Joy on MSNBC this morning. And like that clip, all the other clips come from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You can see the two topics I'm covering listed down in the video description. If you're watching as a recorded show, there should be time indexes down there so you can skip between the topics. There's also a link to my clip list where you can see the notes I use to remember what the 13 clips are about. You might be able to understand my notes, you might not, but you can follow along that way. The two big topics, well, the main topic, Trump loves guns, or the big push for gun control. Last week there was a lot of coverage of just the tragedy of the shooting in Florida, and now this week it's turned more political. There was the big town hall meeting on CNN where Marco Rubio and some of the survivors and and some of the parents of dead children were there, all discussing gun control and whether it's going to happen or not. Well, I'll discuss that as we go along, and then I'll have a couple clips at the end on the ongoing Russia scandal. The Democrats got to put out their response memo to the Nunes memo from a few weeks ago about the FISA court and whether the Obama administration improperly spied on the Trump campaign, which seemed bogus even when the Nunes memo came out, and seems even more bogus now that we have Adam Schiff and the Democratic memo coming out. But like I said, before I get to those two clips, I want to have about 11 clips here on 11 clips on the gun control story. And like I said, well, a couple of the clips, the first couple clips are both on gun control and Russia. The first clip, like I said, is a comedy montage of how Donald Trump is not really a great listener. And you may have noticed when he had his listening session with on the subject of school shootings and school safety, he had a little card where he had to remind himself to say, "I hear you." Well, he might have been able to use that card last night when he was doing the interview with Justice Jeanine Pirro, as as Joy Reid pointed out on AM Joy on MSNBC this morning in this clip.
Donald Trump paid a visit to his second favorite TV show after Fox and Friends last night, calling in to Jeanine Pirro. And Judge Jeanine hardly got a word in edgewise.
And you know what's interesting? Somebody should look into it, because what they did is really fraudulent.
But for
she's able to really take, Jeanine, she's able to take.
Well, she drills
that document
down.
Was really.
But I have to tell you that Adam Schiff just tweeted.
And by the way, that is true, Jeanine, as a nation. And we have to get it done. A lot of great things are happening. We have to change it. We can't allow.
Right.
We should all be on the same team.
Schiff,
they shouldn't have two sides fighting to the various coasts and to where it's going, to the refineries. So,
Mr. President,
it's been an incredible period. And I was saying before, and somebody was very readily agreeing with me, and it's just bad for the country. So hopefully that can get done. Champion of the Second Amendment.
I don't think there's any question about
protection. You have to have protection.
And
so
you're
we're going to have tremendous border security. That's part of what we want right now. Hello?
Mr. President?
Girl interrupted. Girl interrupted. That wasn't the only phone call that went awry for Trump.
So yeah, girl interrupted is what Joy Reid called it. My one criticism is they should have tied it into the fact that he needed that card. MSN, they should have pointed out that he's just not a very good listener. I don't know, is it that he doesn't like listening to women? He doesn't like listening to anyone? I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. Oh, and by the way, for one little bonus, I guess it's sort of a comedy clip, though I forgot to play the last 2 weeks. I forgot to play my bonus Sandy clips, and last week I actually had a my cat Dash and my dog Sandy together. And I think this is actually kind of humorous because I think it shows how Sandy is not the greatest of watchdogs. And I forgot to play it at the end of last week's show, so here it is at the beginning of this week's show. So you can see there, Sandy is just barely noticing that a cat has walked right in front of her face. So, I don't know. Is that a comedy clip? That's the bonus Sandy clip I forgot to show last week. But now I'm going to get into the serious stuff, the serious news summaries. I'm going to show first, for the main summary, this is a little over 4 minutes long from NBC's Meet the Press. Chuck Todd starts off talking about how this could have been an opportunity for leadership from the White House on this whole, this national tragedy, school shooting. It's a crisis-opportunity, as they say, for presidents, where they can show national leadership. But instead, Donald Trump went tweet crazy over this Democratic memo that was released on the whole Russia investigation. And so that's what you'll see Chuck Todd talks about at the beginning of his introduction. And then he also starts talking about the politics of gun control, throws it to the package, which is all about the politics of gun control. I will discuss it with you after we watch it together over here.
Monday morning, right now, President Trump has an opportunity for one of those leadership moments on the issue of guns. But once again, he seems distracted by the Russia investigation, apparently rattled by the release of a Democratic memo challenging Republican allegations of misconduct in the FBI's Russia probe. Mr. Trump sent out 5 tweets yesterday and felt the need to call into Fox News late last night to insist once again that there was no collusion, once again that he did nothing wrong, and to once again blame the election interference on President Obama.
Everybody's looking. There is no collusion. No phone calls. I had no phone calls, no meetings, no nothing. There is no collusion.
Phone calls, by the way, is a new denial for the president as far as the specifics are concerned. The president may have reason to be rattled. In the last 10 days, the Mueller probe has intensified with more indictments and more guilty pleas, plural. But the national conversation right now is on guns, and the NRA is the one in the hot seat, with more than a dozen companies cutting ties this weekend with the gun lobby. The NRA has lashed out at the boycott, calling it a shameful display of political and civic cowardice. Still, you have a president with an A+ rating from the NRA who says he's open to new gun restrictions, including one that the NRA opposes. And you have a Republican governor with an A+ rating from the NRA defying the gun lobby and going further on gun control than Republicans went after Sandy Hook. There are few things more polarizing in this country than the gun debate, and both parties must now decide what, if anything, their bases can support or stomach.
They want to do things that you wouldn't even believe, including taking your Second Amendment rights away.
President Trump caught between a growing movement of grieving parents and students.
How do we not stop this after Columbine, after Sandy Hook?
And his conservative base.
The NRA, they're friends of mine. They backed us all. They're great people.
This week, Mr. Trump appeared open to modest gun reforms, including a bill that would reward states that improve reporting to the FBI's background check system, a ban on bump stocks, though that would likely be challenged in court, and raising the minimum age to buy an AR-15.
We're going to work on getting the age up to 21 instead of 18.
The NRA opposes that change, but faced with protests and boycotts,
NRA, you can beat the PTA.
Several Republican lawmakers, including Florida's governor, are bucking the gun lobby.
We will require all individuals purchasing firearms to be 21 or older.
But just like on immigration, where a long White House listening session produced little action, the devil is in the details. And Mr. Trump has so far refused to talk legislative specifics, instead pivoting the debate to arming teachers.
The teacher would have shot the hell out of him before he knew what happened.
And that's not the only talking point Mr. Trump has borrowed from the NRA.
We must immediately harden our schools.
And I want a hardened school, too. Hardened into a hardened school.
According to a Pew poll last year, twice as many gun owners said they had contacted a public official on the issue of guns than non-gun owners. But there are signals Republicans in suburban districts may sense a change in the political climate. A Florida congressman whose district Mr. Trump won by 9 points came out in favor of an assault weapons ban on Friday.
I spent my life trying to defend this country, and I can't stand to see the weapon that I carried in defense of this country used to kill kids.
Still, most red state and rural Democrats are wary of the gun issue, worrying it will energize the Republican base. 5 senators who caucus with the Democrats voted against an assault weapons ban in 2013, and they're on the ballot this year. And Democrat Connor Lamb, running in the Pennsylvania special election, where voters go to the polls in just over 2 weeks, made it clear he does not want to run on gun control.
So the majority of Americans who tell Pew and other pollsters that they're in favor of banning assault weapons, you do not support that.
I do not support that.
Joining me now is...
So that's a little disappointing that the Democrat running in the special election in Pennsylvania doesn't support an assault weapons ban, and I'll talk about the assault weapons ban and some of the problems with it a little bit later. But I thought that news summary there did a good job of showing the politics of gun control and how it might be changing, although I think the ABC clip I'm about to show does a little bit more to show the change that might be coming, but it did show some cracks in the NRA holdover, especially the Republicans, and it made some good points about how gun control and guns are not just a Democrat versus Republican issue, that there's also sort of this rural versus urban, suburban split, so rural Democrats, if there are any rural Democrats left, and there are some, you saw some of those senators from rural states are not coming out fully in favor of some of the gun control that some of the other Democrats are in favor of. And anyway, that's the NBC clip, and then the ABC clip, much shorter. It's just about a minute long, but I think it does shows a little bit how things might be different now, which is sort of the theme of George Stephanopoulos' introduction before the interview that he did with Dana Loesch that I'll show a little later, and you'll see Dana Loesch at the end of this clip.
Good morning. It does feel different this time. We've seen heartbreak, shock, and fury after past mass shootings from Columbine to Sandy Hook. And yes, we've also seen the passions cool, the moments fade. But never before have we seen anything quite like the Never Again movement. Students, survivors in the streets, walking out of schools into state capitals, and the White House demanding change. Major corporations cutting their ties with the National Rifle Association. Banks rethinking their relationship with the companies that manufacture assault weapons. And longtime members of the NRA beginning to break ranks. Like Florida Governor Rick Scott, who now wants to raise the age for purchasing firearms, joined last night by President Trump.
It doesn't seem to make sense that you have to wait till you're 21 years old to get a pistol, but to get a gun like this maniac used in the school, you get that at 18. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And frankly, I explained that to the NRA. They're great people.
This morning, we talked to activists on both sides of this searing debate, starting with the national spokesperson for the NRA, Dana Loesch. Welcome back to this.
And I'll have an extended clip of the Dana Loesch interview where, I mean, she is just incredibly unreasonable and not and pretty evasive about some of the questions you'll see that George Stephanopoulos asked her. But even more, before I get to that, I want to show you 2 clips from CNN. First, the CNN introduction that's also a little over a minute long, about a minute and 18 seconds, I think it says there. And it covers the same ground you saw from the other 2 programs, but it also has a much stronger concentration on the mistakes of law enforcement. And that was followed by about a 30 or 25 minute interview with the sheriff of Broward County, Scott Israel, where Jake Tapper was really confrontational about the mistakes that the law enforcement officers made. And I'm going to show you just a little under 7 minutes of that interview, taken from the beginning and the end. I'm like leaving out 20 minutes in the middle. But before I get to that, here's the introduction. Jake Tapper saying the State of the Union is still raw, and then covering, you'll see pretty much the same facts as the last 2 clips over here.
Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is still raw in the wake of the tragedy in Florida. President Trump and Florida's Republican governor have promised action, including some proposals to change existing gun laws. And a brand new CNN poll now shows support for stricter gun purchasing laws at its highest level of the last 25 years, with 70% now saying that they back new, more restrictive gun legislation. Nearly 2/3 think government and society can take action that will effectively prevent future mass shootings. That's much higher than CNN polls after the tragedies in Las Vegas and Orlando and Charleston and Sandy Hook, suggesting perhaps the shooting in Parkland, Florida has shifted public opinion in a way other incidents have not. But there are also new questions about the numerous missed red flags about the shooter and the immediate response. Coral Springs sources tell me, in addition to the school resource officer, when Coral Springs police arrived on the scene, they were surprised to find 3 other Broward County Sheriff's deputies who had not yet entered the school. The Broward County Sheriff denies those reports, saying only 1 deputy was there during the time of the shooting while the shooter was there. But what about in its immediate aftermath, when it was still an active shooter situation and victims were in desperate need of help? Joining me now to discuss all of this is Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel. Sheriff, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
So, yeah, like I said, much more coverage there of the mistakes from law enforcement, which have been really striking at several different levels of law enforcement. There were a bunch of screw-ups that came from the investigation of the shooting. I mean, the thing is, police often don't have a lot of transparency and accountability. That's a problem we have with our police where I live, and that's something that the ACLU fights for, more police transparency and accountability. I've been involved in some of those issues over the years, and what that means is that a lot of times police officers do their job and no one is really looking and no one is following up, and it's only when something like this happens that they get the scrutiny, and then you see that they're not doing their jobs that well. And I think Jake Tapper did a really good job of pointing that out, like I said, in a 25-minute interview with Scott Israel, the Sheriff of Broward County. As usual, you can find the entire State of the Union program at a link I put down in the video description. But I've taken about the first 4 minutes and the last 3 minutes, something like 2.5 minutes. The beginning and the end, and especially the end, I think is interesting. There's a lot in the middle that I left out. If you want to see the specifics, you want to see Jake Tapper really grind down the specifics, especially about the missed calls or the missed opportunities when visiting the shooter's home, where they say 29 times, there's like 26, 29, but dozens of times that the police had contact with this guy and knew that there was trouble. And, well, I'll talk about it with you after we watch this almost 7-minute clip. Like I said, the beginning and the end of the interview edited together. Jake Tapper interviewing Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel this morning over here.
I want you to take a listen to Stoneman Douglas High School senior Brandon Huff talking about your deputy, the school resource officer, Scott Peterson.
The school resource officer was behind a stairwell wall, just standing there, and he had his gun drawn, and he was just pointing it at the building. And shots started going off inside. You could hear them going off over and over. He was just talking on the radio, and he never did anything for 4 minutes. He's the only one with a gun. He's wearing a bulletproof vest, and he has all that while school security guards, coaches pretty much, were running in, shielding kids.
Sheriff, how do you respond to this student?
All what the students said, our video and audio and all the witness statements we have taken corroborates that. That's what I saw, and when I saw that, I was disgusted. I was just demoralized with the performance of former Deputy Peterson, and that's why I called him in and suspended him without pay as we were going to move towards termination, and he resigned.
Did he tell you why he didn't go in?
He did not.
I'm also told by sources in Coral Springs that Coral Springs police who arrived at the scene saw that 3 other Broward deputies were standing behind cars, not having gone into the building. What can you tell me about that?
Well, let me be perfectly clear. Our investigation to this point shows that during this horrific attack, while this killer was inside the school, there was only one law enforcement person, period, and that was former Deputy Scott Peterson. Coral Springs arrived. A group of Coral Springs officers went in within, I think, about 4 minutes. We're projecting after the killer left the campus. I understand that they're going to give statements to us regarding the other 3, 4, 5 deputies. At this point, we have no reason to believe that anyone acted incorrectly or correctly. That's what an investigation is. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but nobody's entitled to their own set of facts. We do know, Jake, that Deputy Peterson at the time uttered, he disseminated information over the police radio. We don't know why what those deputies heard. Perhaps they did something by what they heard from Peterson, and that will be, outlined in interviews. We'll get to the truth. But at this point, one deputy was remiss, dereliction of duty, and he's now no longer with this agency. Yeah, that's Peterson.
You're saying that because during the time that the shooter was in the school, you say Peterson was the only one there, but that wasn't known at the time. You know that now because of security cameras you saw when he left the school. This is after the fact. But when did your deputies, not Peterson, but the others, when did they arrive on the scene? Because Coral Springs sources say when Coral Springs police arrived, there were Broward deputies there in addition to Peterson.
And I don't dispute that, but that is an active investigation. We have not taken statements yet from the Coral Springs officers. We found out, I believe, 5 or 6 days ago from their police chief that he told one of our colonels about the information. We're going to be taking statements from those Coral Springs police officers. Then we're going to be speaking with our deputies. If any deputies are alleged to have dereliction of duty, we'll look into that. We don't know what the deputies heard on the radio. Coral Springs and the Broward Sheriff's Office, we have different radio systems. So we don't know what one was hearing vis-a-vis what the other was hearing. All I could tell you is we will investigate every action of our deputies, of their supervisors, and if they did things right, we'll move forward. And if they did things wrong, I will take care of business in a disciplinary manner like I did with Peterson.
And just so people who are watching at home understand, even after the shooter left the school, there was a period of time where nobody was going into the school, no law enforcement officers. People were bleeding out. Nobody knew that the shooter had left the school, so officers needed to go in. I have one last question for you, sir. Florida State Representative Bill Hager from Boca sent a letter to the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, yesterday, asking him to remove you for negligence of duty and incompetence. Here's what he wrote, quote, "An investigation by Sheriff Israel into the unfathomable inaction of these deputies will do nothing to bring back the 17 victims. The sheriff was fully aware of the threat this individual presented to his community and chose to ignore it." What's your response, and will you resign?
It was a shame. No, of course I won't resign. It was a shameful letter. It was politically motivated. I never met that man. He doesn't know anything about me. And the letter was full of misinformation. I wrote a letter back to the governor. I talked about all the mistakes that Hager made in his letter. It was a shameful, politically motivated letter that had no facts. Of course I won't resign.
The last question, sir. Do you think that if the Broward Sheriff's Office had done things differently, this shooting might not have happened?
Listen, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, O.J. Simpson would still be in the record books.
I don't know what that means. There's 17 dead people, and there's a whole long list of things your department could have done differently.
How could listen, that's what after action reports are. That's for lessons learned reports are for. I have entered into conversation with Chuck Wexler of the Police Executive Research Forum. They will be coming to town to do an independent after action lessons learned report. We understand everything wasn't done perfectly. And if it happened in Los Angeles or Chicago or any other city, every person wouldn't perform perfectly. That's not what happens. Yes, if Scott Peterson went into, do I believe if Scott Peterson went into that building, there was a chance he could have neutralized the killer and saved lives? Yes, I believe that. But as far as anything else done at this point, I can't say that.
Well, we hope you get to the bottom of it.
I might say it. What's that?
We hope you get to the bottom of it, sir. There are a lot of people wondering about a lot of questions.
We will. We will. And there's no timeline on it other than to work as fast as we can, but we want to get it right. We want to get it accurate. When we come to the public, we want accurate information, and we're not going to push forward to meet the timeline of a show or a newscast.
So, I don't know. That, like I said, there's a lot more in the middle of that interview that I cut out that you could watch for yourself, but I thought that the sheriff was being fairly evasive. He seemed to want to slow walk information, and it almost seemed to me like the plan is to try to blame as much of this as possible on this Deputy Scott Peterson, the guy who's already resigned, who, like, the school resource officer who stayed outside and did nothing. And apparently there were a few other deputies who showed up a little later and still stayed outside, but that investigation is ongoing, and somehow they may be trying to blame that also on this Deputy Scott Peterson because of something he said on the radio or about previous police I've been aware of. So I don't know, you can let me know what you think down in the comment section, but and also you can let me know what you think about that. If ifs and buts were candy and nuts, O.J. Simpson would still be in the record books. That didn't really make much sense to me, but I don't know why you would bring up O.J. Simpson in this situation, but it was a good interview by Jake Tapper, and like I said, I recommend that you go check it out if you get a chance. And another good interview was, and this is another one that I've cut into two pieces, edited together. This is Dana Loesch, the spokesperson for the National Rifle Association, went on This Week with George Stephanopoulos and basically tried to explain why all forms of gun control are ineffective and should not, well, I won't preview the clip too much. I will just, this is a little over 5 minutes, and I will play it and discuss it with you after we watch together here.
Now let's begin with President Trump right there. You say he says the NRA is ready to do things. He wants to raise that minimum age. Will the NRA back that?
Well, the NRA has made their position incredibly clear. The 5 million members of the NRA have made their position incredibly clear. And I do want to caution people. Well, I do want to caution people because I know that people are trying to find daylight between President Trump and 5 million law-abiding gun owners and law-abiding gun owners all across the United States. These are just things that he's discussing right now. I think that it's great that as president, he had all of these individuals, all of these constituents come into the White House. He had this listening session. He's really looking for solutions. He wanted to hear what they had to say, and that's what he's doing. So far, nothing's been proposed yet. The NRA has made their position clear.
Well, but let me just say the position is you do not want to raise the age.
That's what the NRA came out and said. That's correct.
The president has also talked about banning these bump stocks. Is the NRA prepared to back that?
Well, the NRA already called for, they already made it clear, the ATF needs to do their job, and they need to make sure that their definitions are consistent. The NRA called for this before the president made a statement, before he also asked Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
As you know,
so
Dana, the ATF
they're on the same page.
No, they're not. They're actually not on the same page. The ATF says they don't have the authority right now to ban bump stocks. The president has now said he wants those to be banned. Will the NRA back that?
The NRA doesn't back any ban. The NRA has asked the ATF to do its job and make sure that these classifications are consistent.
How about this? There actually have been studies that showed it did have an effectiveness. I want to bring up from the University of Massachusetts researcher Louis Clareva shows that, look at that right there, from 1984 to 1994, you had 19 incidents, 155 deaths. Then, 1994 to 2004, it goes down. 12 incidents, only 89 deaths. The ban expires. We see the casualties go way up again.
And there are also studies that show, and you yourself have acknowledged before previously, just a couple of years ago,
not perfection, absolutely,
that it did not have much of an effect on the crime rate. Furthermore,
but it does have an effect on the lethality
I want to point this out, George. I want to point this out, though. 3%, only 3% of homicides in the United States actually are carried out with rifles. The highest number actually goes in with handguns. And these are illegally possessed by repeat offenders because these people keep getting slaps on their wrists.
No one's
but here's the bigger point,
let me just, excuse me for a second. No one's saying this is going to eliminate every single killing. But we do know we're the only country that has wide access to these kind of weapons, and no one else has the frequency or the intensity of these kind of mass shootings that we do.
That's actually not true. France had a higher casualty rate in 1 year than the entire 2 administrations of Barack Obama, and they're a fifth of our population. But, George, here's the biggest point here. We're talking about banning firearms, and the discussion is about banning all semi-automatic firearms, and that's really the discussion. Can we actually look at what could have prevented this? That firearm did not walk itself into the school. An individual who was allowed to go unchecked by the Broward County Sheriff's Office allowed that firearm to go in the school. This is not the fault, nor are 5 million innocent law-abiding Americans culpable for this. And many of us are parents too, George. I want to see as much attention on the Broward County Sheriff, the FBI, the 2 FBI tips, and the numerous calls. George, I'm not a member of the FBI. I'm not a member of law enforcement. But I'm going to tell you, if someone is online using their name saying they're going to shoot up a school, if they're banned from school because they've taken bullets and knives in their backpack to school, if they've been sending messages saying that they're going to shoot and kill their classmates, that to me sounds like a potential school shooter.
I'm not going to argue with that.
Family and neighbors called the Broward County Sheriff's Office to report this individual, and they did not follow up. That is the headline.
Could not agree more on that point. That is certainly a fact here.
That's what minimizes this. That's what minimizes casualties when we follow up.
It's one of the things that minimizes casualties.
It's the thing that minimizes casualties.
Almost all Americans believe that background checks for all gun purchases make a huge difference. Recent poll from Quinnipiac, 97% of Americans support that. The NRA opposes it. You know, we've seen all these NRA members I just cited.
Well, and I want to point out the question for that poll, by the way, was, do you support background checks if it prevents, you know, those who are dangerous and terrorists, et cetera, from getting firearms?
So you think they just don't work?
I think everybody supports background checks, and I want to point out that it was the NRA that created the NICS system. Here's the problem, George. Do you realize that right now, and politicians could change this today, they could change it tomorrow. Did you know that right now 7 million prohibited possessors can walk into a gun store and legally purchase a firearm? People who have received due process, who through violent criminal behavior are illegally barred from purchasing and carrying firearms, people who have been adjudicated mentally unfit because they're a danger to themselves and others, they can right now go and buy a firearm, because as it stands right now, only 38 states are reporting less than 80% of these convictions to the NICS system.
And Dana,
That's
you know perfectly well the reason states aren't mandated to go through that system is because of a lawsuit the NRA filed.
That's actually a grotesque misunderstanding. I'm sorry to say that of Prince versus the United States, that's what you're talking about. That case that you're specifically referring to, George, actually was a case where the federal government was trying to force states to implement and administer a federal program at the state level. However, that case that you're citing, the one that the NRA contributed an amicus brief to, says that that case did not do anything to stop states from reporting dangerous people who have been criminally convicted to the federal government.
Now, I wanted to comment a little on that Supreme Court case they're talking about, and what she said at the end there was really disingenuous, where she said the result of Prince versus the United States, this Supreme Court case, doesn't do anything to prevent states from reporting, but as George Stephanopoulos pointed out, it does say that they can't be required to report. The federal government can't make them do the reporting. And actually, I've spent a lot of time citing the case of Prince versus the United States. It was, as Dana Loesch was saying there, the NRA submitted an amicus brief. It was an opinion by Antonin Scalia that said that the federal government cannot commandeer law enforcement officers into implementing their administrative regulations. And the reason this is important is because the same case actually applies to sanctuary cities, because immigration enforcement is also a civil, not criminal system. And so it's another set of federal administrative regulations. And courts have found already, based on this Scalia opinion saying that the federal government can't commandeer local law enforcement into administering their gun control, it also applies just as strongly that the federal government cannot commandeer local law enforcement into administering their immigration regulations. And that's why sanctuary cities are constitutional, why they're not disobeying federal law. They're not being commandeered into administrating these federal regulations. It's because immigration and also gun control, the gun control background check system is a civil administrative function, not a criminal law that has to be enforced. So I thought it was an interesting fact that came up in this gun control argument, because it is such a live issue in the immigration sanctuary city issue. But I also thought that, in general, Dana Loesch there was pretty unreasonable and evasive, and she seemed to be saying that Donald Trump was going to get pulled away from all of the, so-called reforms, the, banning of bump stocks, the background checks, certainly the assault weapons ban, which Trump doesn't even support. Although I am going to show one Republican who supports it in just a minute. The next three clips are all Republicans, sort of like different shades of Republicans on gun control. It's Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, then Governor Rick Scott from Florida, and then and then in the middle there, I actually have Andrew Pollock. Brian Mast is the middle Republican. Sorry, I had to look at my notes there because he's the Florida Republican who you saw in the earlier news clip, who is a injured vet who decided to change his mind and come out in favor of the assault weapons ban, and he'll talk about that. Though he backs up, he backtracks a little when he talks to the new permanent host of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, in the clip I'm going to play after next. But then this next clip is Pat Toomey, Republican senator from Pennsylvania, who's trying to get some gun control through these increased background checks, which he talked about with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, basically. And this is also edited together I wanted to focus on the question as to whether there will be the votes, because I don't think there will be the votes, but we can talk about that together after we watch this 90-second clip together. Oh, wait. Before I get to that, that's why I'm one off clip. Before I get to that Pat Toomey clip, the one clip I have to show you after that whole big, long Dana Loesch clip, I have to show you David Hogg, the student who survived the shooting in Parkland, Florida. This is 1 minute of his reaction to Dana Loesch, and he's disgusted, as you might think he would be over here.
David, during the shooting. David, you see there what you're up against. NRA against any change in the minimum age, against universal background checks, against a ban on semi-automatic weapons.
Honestly, it's just disgusting. They act like they don't own these politicians. They still do. It's a Republican-controlled House, Senate, and executive branch. They can get this stuff done. They've gotten gun legislation passed before in the favor of gun manufacturers. And what I want people to know is, look at Dana. Look at what she's saying. Is she actually saying anything, or is that just a tone to distract the American public and distract her NRA members from the fact that she's not serving them? She is serving the gun manufacturers. She's not serving the people of the NRA, because the people that are joining the NRA, 99.9% of them are amazing people that just want to be safe, responsible gun owners, and I fully can support that.
How do you convince them to convince their leadership that we need change?
They have to do that. In the same way that this is a democracy that's currently broken, the NRA is an organization that's completely broken.
Ashley, your teacher.
And that's kind of a new riff that David Hogg has added since I've been watching him during the week, about the NRA members being good and the NRA being broken. I'm not sure what that's about. Later in a clip I'm not going to show, he was also very positive about law enforcement in a way that I didn't quite understand. But I definitely agreed with him about Dana Loesch's comment and being disgusting. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And I already pretty much introduced all three of the next clips. Starting with the Pat Toomey one that like I said, I edited together so that you could see the question, is David Hogg going to be disappointed? That's what, I think it's likely that very little is going to get passed through the Congress, and I'll be interested to see what the longevity is on this never again movement of Parkland students. If they're still working through the election, and we're still talking about them next year when there's a Democratic House and maybe a Democratic Senate, then that will show real effectiveness. Or is it just going to be a spark that pushes things for a few days or a few weeks, or that, I guess only time will tell, as they say. But here's Pat Toomey talking about whether he has the votes to get his very modest background check improvement passed? And the answer is maybe not, but not yet. Here, I'll talk about it with you after we watch together here.
Cornyn, the number 2 Republican in the Senate, he has a fix NICS bill. He says basically he's hinting that whether it's your measure or even something that the president wants to put out there, raising the age on getting an assault weapon to 21, that it doesn't have the votes in the Senate. Is he right? Does your bill not have the 60 votes?
We don't know the answer to that, Chuck. I've spent a lot of hours on the phone and communicating in other ways with my colleagues this week. I do think there are some members who were not supportive in the past who are reconsidering. I haven't got anyone who said, yes, sign me up, Pat, but there are definitely members who are reconsidering. The president's expression of support for strengthening our background check system is very constructive. The president can play a huge and, in fact, probably decisive role in this. So I intend to give this another shot.
Let me ask you, finally, have you been guaranteed that your bill's going to get a vote?
No, I'll be speaking with Senator McConnell about that this week. Time on the Senate schedule is precious, especially with our Democratic colleagues chewing so much of it up over non-controversial nominees. But if we've got 60 votes, then I think that'd be a very compelling argument to have a vote, and I think we would.
All right, Senator Pat Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania. Thanks for coming on and sharing your views. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Chuck.
So I edited those two clips together so you can see that not only is Senator Pat Toomey has not gotten any additional votes since he lost last time on this modest repair to the NICS background check system, which, I mean, it's like almost literally the least they could do. And so far, no one's told him that they voted no before. They're willing to vote yes now. He's not even sure that he can get a vote from the Senate from Mitch McConnell. Gun control. Nope. It's not going to be a yup. It's going to be a nope or whatever. I'm sorry. I just all of a sudden had to do that Toby the Turtle impression, but not only do we have to worry about Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan isn't necessarily going to put any gun control measures up for a vote in the House. Doesn't matter how many votes there might be. Never mind whether it's going to pass. It might not even be put up for a vote. So I thought a week ago that these kids from the shooting are, feeling really empowered, and they're in some ways impressive to watch, but I'm just worried that they're up for disappointment, and if they can keep going through the disappointment and they're still here next year when hopefully there's a better Congress, then I think their movement might have an impact. And to show that there is some movement, I'm going to show you this next clip from CBS's Face the Nation, which I already talked about briefly. This is Brian Mast, the Republican member of Congress from Florida, who has changed his mind so much that you saw in one of the news reports earlier that he said he was for an assault weapons ban. Here he in a way that I find kind of disturbing, likens it to the Muslim ban or the travel ban that, remember when Donald Trump said, we got to stop all Muslims coming from in the United States until we figure out what the hell is going on. Well, he's kind of saying the same thing about assault weapons. That doesn't really give me a lot of comfort, but you can watch it for yourself in the 2-minute, 16-second clip from CBS's Face the Nation with the new permanent host of Face the Nation, as I said earlier, Margaret Brennan, over here.
I want to bring you in here because you've had a change of heart in the wake of Parkland. You're now calling for a ban on the AR-15 and also an increase in the age limit for purchase. Why? And did you, in this case, change your view?
Look, we've seen a lot of shootings out there. We've seen what's happened here in Parkland. We've seen what happened in Las Vegas. We saw what happened in Orlando. And for me personally, it pains me to know that I went out there willing to defend my country, willing to give everything with almost the exact same weapon that's used to go out there and unfortunately kill children here in Parkland. And I think there's a very real opportunity here for response and here for action. And that's what really brought me to my change of heart in talking about this. I just can't stand to see that personally.
But for those two items that you are supporting, it doesn't appear that your party or your congressional leadership is behind you on that. Do you have a sense that any other Republican rank and file members will join you in this call?
So let's look at one of the ways that we can bring people into this conversation, not just my fellow rank and file members, Republican leadership in the House and the Senate, but also the president. You know, what I love about my president is that he is a man of action. And I can tell you that as veterans and soldiers, when we see a chance to save life, we don't hesitate, we don't have a conversation, we go out there and do it. I think that's what the travel ban has been all about. It's been about saving lives in our community and in our country. Let's take that exact same model and apply it right now to this situation.
But you don't have any numbers of who's with you at this point, because the president hasn't called for an assault weapons ban.
But I think we can get the president on board and members of Congress on board to say, let's put that same kind of pause on board right now, where we look at who's having access. What do they have access to? What were the failures that went on with the FBI and in the ATF and in other state agencies and in the states? What's everything that's going on there? Let's get back to the American people after this pause with sensible regulation, with sensible solutions, because we are going to look at this in a very real way. It made sense in the case of terrorists coming into this country. I think it should make sense in looking at guns.
Do either of you gentlemen believe that teachers...
So, I don't know, that was kind of a weird mix for me, because for a while he was saying stuff that seemed rational, and then he like veered into the travel ban and the man of action, and I don't know, he was, the thing about it is, that kind of argument might be just crazy enough to work on our unconventional president. That's the kind of thing that actually might convince Donald Trump. That's the real difficulty with any of these. Even what Trump now says he's for, you know, he said he was for things like, a bill to legalize the Dreamers in exchange for the wall, but then he got right-wing pushback, and he like changed his position, and you can never tell what his position is. And so I mean, maybe an argument like the one you just heard from Republican member of Congress Brian Mast there. He's a veteran, you know, Trump likes veterans because, you know, he has the problem, he went to like military school but then didn't go into the military because he was cadet bone spurs, isn't that what Congressman Tammy Duckworth called him, cadet bone spurs, I think. But you can let me know what you think about Brian Mast and his kind of rational argument mixed with the crazy there, and whether you think it might work on Trump. You can let me know down in the comment section. And my last two clips on the gun issue are both from Fox News Sunday, where I mean, I thought that you'll see that when it comes to Governor Rick Scott from Florida, this is their exclusive interview. Rick Scott didn't go onto the CNN town hall, and he's getting ready to run for the Senate, and so he's, you know, some people have said he looks kind of reptilian, and I think he may be in some ways trying to shed his skin from going from governor to senator, and trying to like pretend he's not as pro-NRA as he has been. So he's put together this package of, he wants to raise the age for rifles to 21 from 18. He wants to get rid of bump stocks. He wants to have these emergency restraining orders where you can take away people's guns that they have in some other states. Put a lot more money into hardening the schools, and then some more money into mental health. And that's his package that Chris Wallace asked him about in an interview that I just took a couple, one clip from. And first I wanted to show the package, and then I wanted to show Chris Wallace did some good follow-ups in this clip on how, but it's kind of coming from the right wing. It's almost like he's cross-examining Governor Rick Scott on behalf of the NRA, like, why aren't you sticking with the, you know, we gave you an A+ rating and you're not sticking with our positions anymore. What happened? And this is about 3.5 minutes from Fox News Sunday this morning over here.
Thanks for what you do. Thank you. Let's start with an outline of the plan you've just announced. Raise the age to buy all guns to 21, ban sale of bump stocks, pass a red flag law to let families or authorities go to court to take guns away from mentally ill or violent people, $450 million to harden schools, including law enforcement in every school, $50 million for mental health. Briefly, what's the thinking behind what you decided to do and what you decided not to do?
So, Chris, what I did was I listened to a lot of people, law enforcement, educators, mental health, students, parents, and said, what's going to fix this problem, right? One, we have to make sure our schools are safe, law enforcement. Harden the schools. We've got to make sure we deal with the fact that there are people out there that have mental illness issues. They shouldn't have access to a gun. If you threaten people or yourself, you shouldn't have access to a gun. So everything I'm doing is, how do you solve the problem? I'm a business person. You go in, you solve the problem, and that's why I'm doing it.
During your 8 years as governor, you have gotten an A+ rating from the NRA, but in this package, you've broken with them on a few things, raising the age to buy rifles from 18 to 21, the red flag law. Why?
You know, I'm an NRA member. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in the First Amendment, all the amendments. I think most members of the NRA agree with me. This is logical. I'm sure there's going to be some that disagree. But I'm a dad. I'm a granddad, and I'm a governor. I want my state to be safe. I want every child to be in a safe environment when they're trying to be educated.
But you've been a hardliner for the NRA and gun rights. There's a reason they gave you an A+. Back in 2011, you signed something called the Docs versus Glocks law, which prohibited doctors from asking any of their patients whether or not they had guns. In 2016, after the terrible mass shooting at the Orlando Pulse nightclub, you said the Second Amendment doesn't kill people, evil kills people. And just this last April, here's you in talking to the NRA. Here you are.
We need a majority that has the intellectual capacity to comprehend these 3 words in the Constitution: shall not infringe.
To the degree that you now want to limit some gun rights, some would say that you want to infringe. Governor, were you wrong back then?
No. Here's what you have to do in this job. You have to weigh individual rights, which I clearly believe in. Right? I believe in the Second Amendment. But you also have to make sure you protect your citizens, your kids. And so you've got to weigh each of these things. What I did here is say, I'm going to do what I can to make sure guns are not in the hands of the wrong people. If you have mental illness, you shouldn't have a gun. If you threatened others or you threaten yourself, you shouldn't have a gun. So I'm going to do everything I can to do that. At the same time, harden our schools, significant law enforcement presence, and also make sure we share information. That's one of the issues that we deal with. We got to share information when we know somebody has mental problems. You got to be, all the agencies, whether it's law or state agencies, have to share information.
So what do you think? Do you think Florida Governor Rick Scott there was trying to be a reptilian and shed his NRA skin to transition from being governor to run against Bill Nelson, the incumbent Democratic senator from Florida? And do you think Chris Wallace's cross-examination there was actually the cross-examination of someone coming from the point of view of the NRA saying, hey, why aren't you the hardliner that you have always been, that how come you're not advocating the positions of the NRA when they still have receipts for you or whatever? But if you think that's Fox News bias, you can let me know. But the other bias, I think, from the Fox News Sunday coverage, they the two Parkland survivors they had on had almost no advocacy for gun control. In fact, one of them actually castigated Chris Wallace for talking about gun control too much in his interview with Florida Governor Rick Scott, if you can believe that. He's Andrew Pollock. His daughter died a week ago, so I mean, you can't really fault him for. I think he's. I admire his strength for being able to be out on a news program 10 days after his daughter was killed. That, I mean, I'm the father of a daughter. I don't see myself on a news program 10 days after something that, I mean, that's unimaginable to me. So I just happen to disagree with the viewpoint he is espousing here, which of course I think we're still allowed to do. And you can let me know what you think, and whether it's kind of weird that, or predictable that the right-wing Fox News program would pick this as their Parkland survivor to highlight over in this clip.
When you were at the White House at that very raw, emotional moment, you said, look, after 9/11, we fixed the situation. We made it a lot harder for people to get onto planes with guns. When you hear what Governor Scott just said, when you hear what President Trump is saying, would that fix the problem?
It's not going to be fixed, because I just heard what you said, what you're focusing on. Polarizing this event, the murder of these kids. You're talking about gun control. I just had to listen to you and Governor Scott talk about gun control. Gun control is a big issue. No one in America is going to come together on gun control, Chris. We're here. You didn't say one thing about fixing it. The American people, we could get together on school safety. But when you polarize it, this event and every other media, we don't care about gun control right now. That's a big issue in the country, and you're not going to get everyone together on it. But we're going to get everyone together on fixing our schools. And I just listened to you. So I just listened to you. You didn't talk, you didn't mention one question to Governor Scott about what are we going to do about the security for our children? How are we going to do that? But you're just talking about gun control, which is going to just give you more ratings than every other media event. My daughter's dead. I want to know, our kids are going to school in Kentucky on Monday. How are those kids safe? How about bringing that up to the media? How about bringing that up to Governor Scott? Not about guns. It's not about guns now. Today, it's not about guns. It's about the safety in our schools. And that's what you asked Governor Scott about, and I got to listen to that at my house. My kid's not here because the schools weren't safe. That's the main thing. You go into a courthouse, the judge is safe. The stenographer is not worried someone's coming in with a gun because they can't get in with a gun. The American people, we just want our schools safe. We don't want to talk about guns right now.
Well, let me bring in Delaney, and I very much.
And they also had a student from the school on who wasn't as adamant about not talking about gun control, but didn't really advocate for gun control. And I mean, I actually agree, as I said earlier, that I think it's unlikely that gun control measures are going to pass, at least federally, although that package of reforms from Governor Rick Scott, that's in Florida, but I mean, well, I don't know, probably won't pass. I'm not an expert on Florida politics, or I mean, I've never lived in Florida, so I couldn't tell you whether that's going to pass in Florida or not, but I know that there's a strong NRA presence in Florida from some of the coverage I've seen recently, but I also know Florida's kind of a swing state. I mean, we all remember the 2000 election, and it's been close every year in every election since then, and so I couldn't tell you whether those reforms will pass in Florida, but I don't think that talking about gun control just because it's not going to pass immediately is a waste of time, because it's going to build over time, and like I said, if you really want some of those reforms to pass, you have to keep fighting for them, maybe lose in this Congress, and then have some chance in the new Congress next year, based on people who no longer have their jobs because they were on the wrong side of this issue. If you can actually get people to vote that way, that's the way the system's supposed to work. So it is worth talking about. And that father, Andrew Pollock, like I said, I sympathize with his loss tremendously, but I don't think you can harden schools like you do an airport or a courthouse. I used to work in a courthouse, and there are very limited points of entry, and there are long lines for just a few people. There are 3,000 people in that school, and there are many different ways into most schools. You know, where I went to school, there weren't even fences around my school. That basically the entire camp. I mean, there were like almost an infinite number of entry points. So unless you want your schools to start looking like prisons, I don't think hardening the target is really the answer. That's my opinion. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section. And that's actually the last clip on the gun issue. I now have two clips, one a Democratic senator, one Democratic member of Congress, responding to questions on the Russia issue. There was a big there are a bunch of news items. First, there was new indictments, and then a new guilty plea, Rick Gates. Maybe you remember a couple weeks ago I was trying to remember Rick Gates' name. I kept thinking, Rick James? Is it Rick James? No. And that's just because I'm an old Dave Chappelle Show fan. But Rick Gates pled guilty and is now cooperating with Special Counsel Robert Mueller, which could put more pressure on Paul Manafort. And, you know, Paul Manafort left the Trump campaign after a few months, and Rick Gates, his aide, stayed on all the way through the transition and into the beginning of the Trump administration. So he actually could, you know, maybe he saw what happened at that infamous Trump Tower meeting on June 9th, 2016 with the Russians and Donald Trump Jr., and he knows whether Donald Trump Sr. was involved, or who knows what he could say. That's all speculation, but he got a pretty good deal, so and it might even include probation if he testifies well. And then yesterday, Donald Trump finally released the Democratic response memo to the Nunes memo I covered a few weeks ago, where the Republicans were claiming that the Obama administration improperly spied on Carter Page, who was actually at the time was already a former Trump campaign aide on foreign policy. And you can actually read the entire 10-page, well, almost the entire 10-page Democratic response memo at a link I put down in the video description. I say almost because some of the juiciest parts are redacted, and it's like every time they talk about bad things that Carter Page or the Trump campaign did with the Russians, it's like blacked out, blacked out, blacked out. So that's interesting in and of itself, and I'm going to show two clips on this. First is NBC's Meet the Press, where Chuck Todd introduces a little bit about this and then talks to Senator Amy Klobuchar about what social media should do to stop all of this Russian trolling with bots, and even mentions trying to police YouTube, and that's a little disturbing. And then the final clip I'll show after that is Adam Schiff talking to Jake Tapper. And Adam Schiff is, you know, it's like he's the main author, I think, of this Democratic memo that was released. And so that will come up more in the second clip. But here's the first clip with Senator Amy Klobuchar and Chuck Todd on Meet the Press this morning here.
Back this weekend, we got to see House Democrats' response to Republican charges of misconduct in the FBI's Russia investigation. The Democrats' newly declassified document defends the FBI's surveillance of former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page and rebuts Republicans' highly publicized memo alleging partisan bias at the Justice Department. Now, part of the reason that initial memo was so hyped, Kremlin-linked bots seeking to discredit the Russia investigation. The automated accounts designed to amplify political divisions sprang into action on social media, calling for that memo's release. And of course, they've also gotten involved in this gun debate as well, whether trying to create fake news or amplify fake news. Joining me now is Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. She's introduced a bipartisan bill aimed at trying to police social media, at least on the advertising front. Senator Klobuchar, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks. It's great to be on, Chuck.
All right, let me start with this larger issue here of policing social media. I know your bill, and it's an attempt to make digital ads part of the campaign finance laws that we have here, that they're regulated just the same. But would your bill have been able to regulate YouTube and keeping them from spreading this idea that one of the students was an actor, for instance, when it came to the gun activism?
There's several fronts that we should be operating on here, Chuck. I mean, first of all, the thought of these innocent kids, they get no NRA money. They're just out there telling the truth about what happened, leading to what I hope is going to be a seminal moment in our country where we finally get Congress to act on some sensible gun legislation. They're out there doing that, and at the same time you have websites linked to Russia that are immediately, within hours, putting out fake things through bots, saying that these kids are paid actors, things that are totally false. Okay, so one, come on, administration, put those sanctions in place. They went through 98-2 against Russia for this very reason, that they were messing around in our American elections. Secondly, on the bot front, separate from my legislation, these are the most sophisticated companies in America. They have brilliant people working there. I believe that they've got to put more resources. Maybe it means they make less profits off of ads and other things, but they've got to put the resources into Facebook and Twitter to stop these bots from dominating the accounts. There are literally tens of millions of these accounts out there right now on people's pages.
How do you incentivize?
And the third thing is...
Oh, go ahead. Finish your third point. Sorry, I apologize.
No, it's just, how do you incentivize it? Public pressure, Congress holding hearings, pushing them and pushing them, people realizing that these are fake people, which I'm starting to see on my account.
You know, should they be fined, you know, in a Superfund disaster? Should Facebook and Twitter face fines if they fail to follow, you know, to purge itself of bots, for instance, after the government finds out?
I think that would be a great idea, but then you need a Congress to act. And there are too many people that are afraid of doing something about this, because we know these sites are popular. Everyone loves putting recipes, cat videos. It's a great thing. But at the same time, there's an ugly side of this. And someone once said that these systems were set up without alarms, without locks, and big surprise, bad guys are coming in and manipulating people. And that is what's happening, and worse, literally committing crimes when they tell people they can text in and vote. And the last thing we know is that Russian rubles were spent on ads coming out of this latest indictment, that the Russians spent a lot of money on paid ads. That's much simpler to regulate, Chuck. You know why? TV, your station right now has rules in place, so does radio and print. Do the same thing. They got to have disclaimers on issue ads and on candidate ads, and they have to disclose them so the press and the other candidates can look at these ads and figure out what they're where they're coming from, what they mean.
I want to move specifically to the gun.
So, I don't know. Some of that sounded kind of heavy-handed to me. Chuck Todd, you know, isn't there some way we can stop people from spreading misinformation on YouTube? No, I don't think, though he may have been talking about whether we can stop Russian bots from promoting misinformation on YouTube. And I don't know, are any of you watching Russian bots? Please, if you're a Russian bot, please identify yourself. But I don't know, is there some way you could get YouTube or Facebook or Twitter to identify the national origin and the humanness? Or I hear that they're already purging a bunch of Russian bots from Twitter, and people on the right wing especially are losing a whole bunch of followers, or I saw that somewhere, but I saw it on Facebook or Twitter, so maybe it was a rumor spread by Russian bots that there was a purge of Russian bots, and I don't know. So on the one hand, I think some of those regulations might have been a little heavy-handed, you know, fine them, and you know, you have to, but I think some of those regulations about, you know, having some of the same rules apply to digital ads that apply to print ads and TV ads, that makes sense. And the other thing is, I think that Facebook and Twitter have been dragged into admitting that they were part of this problem, you know, that you saw in the Mueller indictments that I talked about last. We've been slow in admitting what they did, and they're trying to solve the problem totally internally in non-transparent ways that doesn't really give people a lot of confidence that the problems are being solved, or even, you know, what the solutions are. And I don't even want to get into YouTube and the concerns I have about the way they solve problems, but the final clip I want to show you is this clip that I promised at the beginning, and I've been talking about, I promised in the title. This is Adam Schiff talking to Jake Tapper about the Democratic memo I think he was the author of, and it's a rebuttal to the Nunes memo from a few weeks ago, which was pretty bogus on its face to begin with, as I talked about the week that was released. And you can read the entire 10-page Democratic memo except for the heavy redactions, as I've said, at a link down in the video description. And I think you get a good summary in this clip, which includes actually a clip of Donald Trump attacking Adam Schiff last night on the Jeanine Pirro show. And then you get, first there's an introduction from Jake Tapper sort of summing up the contents of the Democratic memo, and then he brings on Adam Schiff and gets him to react to Donald Trump attacking him as a bad person on the Jeanine Pirro show last night. And this clip is, I think it's 5 minutes, 40 seconds, the final clip of the show tonight, which I will discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
A major story, the newly released memo from Democrats countering claims from House Intelligence Committee Republicans that the FBI abused its surveillance powers by targeting one-time Trump campaign advisor Carter Page in 2016. The Democratic memo released last night argues that the surveillance warrant used to monitor Page was perfectly appropriate. It also reveals the FBI first met with Page back in March 2016, before the controversial Steele dossier on Donald Trump and Russia was written. The memo also asserts that the Justice Department specifically disclosed to the FISA court that Steele was hired by politically motivated sources, although the memo does not mention the Clinton campaign or the DNC by name. This is a rebuttal to the Republicans' Nunes memo by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes, which accused the FBI of not mentioning Democratic ties to the dossier. After its release, President Trump said the Republican memo totally vindicated him in the Russia probe. As for the Democratic memo, he says a, quote, total political and legal bust, and he's calling the man who wrote it, Representative Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, quote, a bad guy. Joining me now to respond in an exclusive interview is Democratic Congressman from California, Adam Schiff. Congressman, good to see you as always. Your new memo from the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee released yesterday. Take a listen to what President Trump said in response during an interview last night.
Well, all you do is you see this Adam Schiff. He has a meeting and he leaves the meeting and he calls up reporters, and then all of a sudden they have news, and you're not supposed to do that. It's probably illegal to do it. You know, he'll have a committee meeting and he'll leak all sorts of information. You know, he's a bad guy. But it's certainly, the memo was a nothing.
Your response, sir?
Well, I'm proud to be one of the bad hombres, I guess. What the president is referring to, I think what really aggravated him, is when his son came to testify before our committee. I asked him about conversations he had with the president when the president was on that aircraft, and they concocted this false statement about that meeting in Trump Tower with the Russians. And he refused to answer the questions, claiming attorney-client privilege, which clearly doesn't apply to a situation where neither he nor his father are attorney nor client. Our position is, and the Republicans have adopted as well, if witnesses refuse to answer questions and make bogus claims of privilege, as he did, as Steve Bannon did, we call them out on it. Well, the president doesn't like that, but that's not a leak. That's a fact, and it didn't disclose testimony he gave. It disclosed a privilege that he asserted that doesn't apply. So I'm not surprised the president doesn't like it. I'm not surprised, frankly, that the White House tried to bury this memo response as long as they could. But it's important for the public to see the facts, that the FBI acted appropriately in seeking a warrant on Carter Page. They're not part of some deep state, as the president apparently would like the public to believe.
So your counterpart, the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, also took a jab at your memo yesterday at CPAC. Take a listen.
What you basically will read in the Democratic memo is they are advocating that it's okay for the FBI and DOJ to use political dirt paid for by one campaign and use it against the other campaign.
Your response?
My response is that the information that was used in part in the FISA application came from a trusted source, Christopher Steele, someone who is a respected member of British intelligence. And it was part of a full package that was presented to the FISA court, and it would have been negligent, frankly, given what the FBI knew about Carter Page, the history that he had, the fact he'd been a target of Russian recruitment even prior to this, the fact that they went out and interviewed him in March, even before Christopher Steele produced any part of the so-called dossier, that they were acting in good faith and disclosed to the FISA court that those who were funding Christopher Steele's work likely had a political motivation of discrediting the campaign.
They didn't disclose, though, that it was from the Clinton, funded by the Clinton campaign and the DNC. For our listeners who aren't familiar with a FISA court, it's a closed, private, secret process where the Justice Department and the FBI are supposed to present all information they can to get the warrant, but there isn't a defense attorney there. Wouldn't it have been better in retrospect if they had disclosed everything, not just that it was political opponents of the president or of then candidate Donald Trump, but that it was Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC? Wouldn't that have been better?
Well, 2 points, Jake. First, it's ironic that the Republicans would attack the FBI for following their procedures, which require that they minimize the names of U.S. persons and U.S. entities that are not the subject of a warrant. So even Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are referred to as Candidate 1 and Candidate 2. They're supposed to mask the identities of people. The second point, Jake, that it's very important for people to know is the issue is, what did Christopher Steele know? What did he know that might influence him, that might bias him? Christopher Steele did not know who was paying, who the client was, who was paying the freight. And so what the FBI properly reported is what they suspected, what Christopher Steele may have suspected, and they masked it appropriately. That's what they're supposed to do. And to suggest otherwise, to take issue with Frank, and I've been on the committee now for 10 years, Jake, this is the first time the Republicans have ever taken an issue with any FISA application. I don't think it's a coincidence that it serves the president's interest to do so here, but the FBI acted appropriately.
Would there have been a warrant?
Oh, sorry about that. I was trying to get you your bonus Sandy clip at the end, but Sandy just came in right at the end. You know, I did play a Sandy clip for you at the beginning there, but I think I did get Sandy to show up here right at the end. Here, let me import this. You can see a little bit of a yawn from Sandy, and she didn't lie down, but here. Lie down. So there you go. It's your bonus Sandy clip. I forgot. Oh, now she's lying down, but that's fresh off of my phone. That's why you had to wait at the end of that clip, was so I could get you that bonus Sandy clip at the end. But as for the memo there, I think Adam Schiff explained it pretty well. The big attack from the Republicans a few weeks ago that the court was misinformed about the source of Christopher Steele. He's Steele, Christopher Steele. He's like some James Bond type dude. That's the point I'm trying to make there. And so he is a formerly reliable source. And Christopher Steele himself didn't know he was working for Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. He was working for this law firm. And if you read the Democratic response memo, they, in detail, without unmasking U.S. persons, they explain that it's like trying to dig up dirt on the candidate. It's someone who was sent to dig up dirt on the candidate from an opposing candidate. They just don't name who it is. Like I said, down at a link in the video description, you can read the entire memo yourself. If the Republican memo wasn't pretty much ridiculous and a dud on its face a few weeks ago, when I discussed it, I think this Democratic memo does a pretty good job of putting the final nail in the coffin of that whole conspiracy theory. But it would be nice if it wasn't so redacted. It kind of bugs me when I don't get, especially, well, read the memo and you'll see what I mean. There are like some sentences where they like leave in a few words that just sort of like tantalize you. Why did they leave in these words but then black out? Well, whatever. You can look at it yourself, and I think you'll see what I mean. But anyway, that's the show, and I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out for you. I did notice I got a super chat contribution along the way from Delta Victor Mike. I really appreciate my super chat contributors. I appreciate people who give me contributions during the week with the PayPal link I now have. It's paypal.me/LiberalViewer. And, of course, my monthly patrons, they're my biggest support of all. They really make it possible. I probably wouldn't be doing this for as long as I've been doing it and spending every Sunday for 253 Sundays in a row without that continued support, especially this last year with pretty much the end of YouTube ad revenue, which you saw in that clip. Chuck Todd seemed to, and Amy Klobuchar said, you know, if they don't get as much ad revenue on YouTube, what about me? What about my need for ad revenue? Without Russian involvement in our elections, how are my broadcasts going to be paid for? That's what I want to know. But no, of course I'm just joking, and I appreciate the support of all my Russian and non-Russian supporters out there, and I will be back next week, hopefully a little bit earlier, so that people on the East Coast, I know I saw some people complaining that I wasn't starting until about 11:30 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States. Hopefully it will be a couple hours earlier next week, and I will be back every week for the foreseeable future, and until I have some reason to put an edited, produced video up on the internet, or until next Sunday when I'll be back with political comedy clips from both Real Time with Bill Maher and I think Saturday Night Live are both going to be back next week. But I guess until then, I will be seeing all of you around the internet.